Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Good
Go
afternoon.
ahead.
Oh, Katina, it wouldn't be right if you didn't lead the introduction.
No, you do it. We got to get us some coalition intro music.
You know what?
That's what we
By
need to
next
work on.
next time, I'm gonna try to find something that's a little bit more professional, um, culturally appropriate. So I make that commitment to you and to our viewers. We're gonna have a little bit more fun moving forward with the coalition. So just as an FYI. Um, with that, I'll say good evening, Coalition community. Good to see you here. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Coalition. Tonight, we're going to be talking about an incredibly important topic, which is the media bias around the portrayal of Black and Brown people in the media, of course. And so we have a lot of thoughts. We were talking about this earlier today as a group. And so we also want to hear your voices and your thoughts on this. So feel free to jump in the comments because we want to understand how our community sees the media. What are some tips and advices and things that we can give to our media friends and brothers and sisters out there to position us in more accurate lights, I would say, and also not to help not perpetuate some of the narratives that Black and Brown folks continually have to dismiss and negate to tell our real truth. So with that, Katina, how are you doing this week? What are some tips and advices?
You know what? I'm good. Look, I'm echoing. I'm making sure that everybody can see us. So I'm doing okay. So far so good this week. Unfortunately, woke up to some very devastating news in our Kansas City community that a young man, 4 years old, barely getting his life started, was taken from us, snatched by what I'm going to say is a coward in our community. And so I'm hoping that the Kansas City community speaks up, speaks out, is as loud a voice as we have been as we address other issues, because this cannot continue. The level of violence in our city is deplorable, and it does not need to knock on our own front door for us to take account of where we are and understand that we have to be united and unified and working cooperatively to address these issues in our community. So I definitely, I'm better as I am in fellowship with you all. But it was a rough start this morning. And if it was a rough start for me, can you only imagine what this young man, his name is Legend, his mother, his grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, that entire family must be going through. So we send our love to that family and to the larger Kansas City community. And we say, and I say, and these are Katina's words. So let me give my disclaimer. My thoughts are not the thoughts of the entire coalition, but what I will say to the young man, young woman, young people that perpetrated this particular crime is that you need to do what's right and turn yourself in. That's all I can say. Because if you have children, put yourself in the other people's shoes, family members. All I thought about this morning myself, I have a 4-year-old grandson who was just with me last week spending some time. And I just can't begin to imagine if he wasn't there with me. So that being said, I know we need to jump into our topic. Thank you all for tuning in with the coalition on this Monday evening. We appreciate you. And as Edgar said, we'll be talking about media bias. So this conversation centers around the way in which Black and Brown people are depicted in the local, the regional, the national news, whether it's through coded language, the photos that are selected to represent us, or the actual way in which photography skills, settings are used to make Black and Brown people look more aggressive or scary or vicious. And that also can happen in radio, as well as television, on social media. There is definitely a reason why we believe what we believe about Black and Brown people, and the media plays a significant role in shaping that narrative. And so we want to dig in today. Erica, welcome, 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 sis. What do you want? You want to lead us off today? Are used to make Black and Brown people look more
I didn't really have any leading thoughts. Really not necessarily prepared. I'm still kind of digesting the morning as well.
Can you turn your volume down on your other device?
Oh, can you hear it? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
There we go. Awesome.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, yeah. Definitely.
But I do feel like it's important that we talk about how the media has portrayed us over time, just from the very beginning. You know, I love history. It tells us a lot about where we are and where we've come from and where we're going. And so when you look at how Black and brown people have been portrayed, not only in the media, but, you know, in terms of education in the books, in our textbooks, in our literature books. I think of some of the books that I read, you know, in school growing up, a lot of the Dr. Seuss books, you know, and then on the media, if you ever watch the news, oftentimes I see it and they interview a Black person and it'd be the you know, it seemed like they pull out the most ratchet one they could find. Like, you know, we all got them. And it's like they bypassed this perfectly, you know, sane looking person to go to this one that just is the most ratchet to put on the screen. Or, you know, when they write the stories, you know, it's just in the most supreme negative, you know, and
yeah. I even think about when we think about our young people, I think about Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and how they were portrayed. Now, Trayvon Martin was going to the store, buying some Skittles and some tea. Yet the picture that actually came out was showing him hooded. He looked menacing almost. And I get that he was wearing a hood and all of that, but there were other softer images that could initially portrayed him in a different light. But remember what the claim of George Zimmerman was, is that he was being attacked by this young man. So you take that photograph and then you take the concept of adultification, which says that Black people always appear to be older than what they were. Then suddenly he's no longer a little boy or a young man. He's this menacing Black body that was out to attack George Zimmerman, even when we know, in fact, that George Zimmerman hunted him down and escalated a situation that didn't need to be escalated. And then as a result, he killed this young boy. So those are some of the things that we consistently see in the media. I think about George Floyd, even in some of the photographs that I saw of him initially. So you could have used a picture of him with his children or his brothers or his friends, but many of the chosen photos that the media selected to use to represent him gave a different story, or certainly attempted to give a different story, as to minimize what these police officers had done in taking his life. And you see it over and over and over again. Edgar, you want to jump in and add anything?
No, just quickly in the comments, I put on an article from Ole Miss. It's actually more of a dissertation around the portrayal of Black men in media, and it actually talks about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman and a couple other stories that, you know, people often ask for evidence in these conversations outside of lived experience. And so just a nice little article for people to consider, that this is not just us bringing it up because we feel the need to bring it up, but it's because there is data and evidence, scientific evidence to prove the fact that these are true statements. And by us having these conversations, also important for us to, again, build awareness that this is an issue. I know for a lot of us, this is not new news, but I'm reminded on a daily basis that some folks need a little bit more information on how to navigate the world and how to understand the world from a different perspective. And so, I think about memes a lot, and recently, and like the portrayal of our communities. I think about the depictions of Latinos as Mexicans, or the stereotypes that are perpetrated in those memes around Mexicans in general, or any other community or culture from the Latino diaspora. I think about all the other things. Like it's really in the confirmation bias that certain folks have around us and how they portray us. And so it is hard to consistently advocate on behalf of ourselves and to remind folks that we are not what some have deemed us to be. And so the work continues tonight.
It does. So I first want to welcome, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Is it Tamaria Smith or Tamara, maybe Smith? She's like, yes, she's agreeing with us. Thank you so much for tuning in and voicing your agreement with this conversation. And then Kim is like, yes, they need to be educated. Thank you all for this platform. Thank you for tuning in, Kim. We appreciate you. Yes.
That's my cousin.
Hey, Cousin Kim. We thank you guys for tuning in. We're glad that you are becoming routine and regular viewers of the Coalition's conversations, because these are important conversations and we want to continue those. And one of the things that I also, as I was doing some research, thought about was the coded language. So you take this coded language with a photograph, right? So I think back to when Hillary Clinton talked about super predators, and immediately it was we on FCC, so I can say it was a shitstorm, right? So it was a shitstorm because people understood that when she talked about super predators, she exactly was talking about Black men, brown men, poor men on the lower socioeconomic status. And so when people then asked me, was I going to vote for her? I had to really educate people, how could I possibly vote for this white liberal woman, supposed white liberal woman, when I understand the perpetuation of negative stereotypes that she was setting on a national platform for my son, for my grandsons, for many of the students that I had taught. And then you think about the term thug. Well, now we hear that from our current, or y'all's current president. And, every time you turn around, these thugs, these bad people. And I'm like, really? Because you didn't say that when a whole bunch of white people marched up to their capital saying, open up our cities. And they had weapons, but they weren't bad people. What were they? Misguided? So again, this veiled racism, and now it's becoming more and more out there again. It's like everyone kind of hid for a while. Now it's back. So when you couple that type of coded language, which we all know what it means. You hear a candidate running on a platform of they are a law and order candidate. You know that means we're going to increase mass incarceration for Black and brown people. And then they show you photos of the people that they're targeting. They look like, my son. They look like you, Edgar. And possibly your son and, nephews and things like that. So we have to have these real conversations and address these issues and then talk about their negative impact they have on the self-image of Black and brown people. And then it also feeds this machine of racism and negativity as it relates to our black and brown. And I won't just say men, I'm going to say women as well, because I think for far too long we have this conversation centering around men, and we keep forgetting that women are raped and assaulted and killed and violated by police and other state sanctioned folk as well. Susanna, do you want to jump in and give us anything? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I'm reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. I know I've mentioned that several times, but Ibram Kendi does a really good job of self-reflection and reflecting on before he learned to be an anti-racist, or before he started his journey of being anti-racist, how he would hear those terms and that language, that coded language about his own people, about Black people. And he mentions speeches that Bill Clinton would do in the 90s, the supposed liberal presidential candidate, and how, the 90s, the early 90s was a surge of all this crime in New York City. And so people were just thinking, right, we were living in, I don't know, it felt like a war zone, I guess, to people then. And so a lot of the blame was put on the Black community. And so he used the term thugs in a lot of his speeches as well. Ibram Kendi talks about, and so how people of color then intrinsically blame themselves and their community. And I mean, I'm learning a lot from the book, but also it's something that's in front of us every day, you know? I'm looking forward to getting into our PowerPoint because a couple of those examples I was getting ready to post and then they were already there. And I was like, exactly.
Well, let's show you. So we, some of our listeners, our viewers are visual folks. Some of us are as well. So we want to give you some visible examples of what we mean when we start talking about the discrepancy between the depiction of Black and brown people versus our white counterparts. So go ahead, Edgar. So just what we were talking about before, right? So you have protesters that are Black, they may be brown. There are some white allies with us as well. So they may be marching, hands up, don't shoot, no justice, no peace, those types of things. But then in contrast to that is those that are marching up on the Capitol, they flipping over cars, setting fires. And it's just like, oh, they're okay. They're just a little misguided. They're upset. These are great people. They just want to get back to work. And so, they're characterized very differently. All of a sudden, you got Black people being called criminals and disruptors, which we should be disrupting, but in such a negative way that we're bringing about martial law. We're enacting curfews, the National Guard. We're even talking about violating the Constitution and turning our own military on its own citizens, which is a clear violation of constitutional law. But this is what our national leader wanted to do because the people did not look like him. And so when the media starts picking these things up and they start perpetuating it, it does more harm than good because immediately the conversation shifts from police brutality and the issue we want to be addressing to, well, why are those people looting? Why are those people damaging their own communities? We just don't understand. Versus what caused them to actually possibly loot, the economics behind that, or tear up their community, the anger, repressed anger now exploding and erupting. We don't want to talk about that. And so we have to start checking our media stations, our media conglomerates about, hey, what are you doing? Let's go to the next one because I think one was really good that was on here.
So something that kind of goes with that is I've seen the ones where like white people or large groups of white people are celebrating the World Series wins or the large championships in their cities. And it's like, oh, they were just so excited. They were having so much fun. But when we're asking for Black people to not be killed and murdered, then it's a problem.
Yeah. This one is really interesting as well. So this is these young people were wrestlers, these white dudes. These are wrestlers. They were burglarizing and all of that. And this is the picture the media chose to use. Suited and booted, haircuts, all that kind of stuff. And then these four brothers, burglary, investigation, not even arrested yet. They're just being investigated. And they find mugshots, or at least the worst photos they can find. And this is how these brothers are being depicted. That's a problem. And again, it further perpetuates these stereotypes. And look at I want you to notice also, with these particular photos, like we didn't pull it from one media outlet and another outlet. These came from the same media outlet, which then I would love to pull additional footage from them to see if this is a pattern of behavior. In most media it is, but I always love to have that evidence to then pull it out and then call them on it and be like, so when you gonna change your behavior? when you gonna do something different? Yes. Erica, you want to add anything to this conversation?
No, not at the moment. I'm just digesting it all.
It's something to digest.
I'm just digesting it all right now.
Yep.
I can already hear some of the pushback in my brain as we show some of these images. I think the words conspiracy theory comes a lot. I feel like some of the questions that I would hear initially asked about these pictures, like, well, which pictures were easily available to the media, right? And so, like, we can't make an assumption on them because of what pictures that they chose. And so I think, I think about all the ways that people try to combat these narratives. And in reality, like, how many of these do we have to demonstrate to show that this is a serious problem in our community and in the way that we interact with media? So if there is any dissent out there, we welcome it. We welcome it in the comments because I'm not stubborn in my opinion, and I can change my opinions. So if anybody's disagreeing with what we're saying right now, I'd love to hear your feedback. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
Yeah, let's actually go back to the comments because Kim says, wow, she had never looked at it this way. And again, we are all victims of oppression and the system that we live under. And so oftentimes our own selves, our minds are being changed or regulated in a way that our own self-image and that of our brothers, our cousins, our uncles, our sons, our daughters, whomever, is being changed. And so that's why you can walk down the street as a woman oftentimes or get in your car and you see a certain type of young man and you will stereotype them. And just as we've complained about white people locking their doors and rolling up their windows, we'll do the same thing as Black and brown people. And it's because we are being conditioned in getting these subliminal messages on a constant and continual basis as it relates to our people. And Hurston says, while it is true that there are a lot of external narratives built linguistically, we also adopt language of oppression under the guise of truth. Black on Black crime, that's coded language. Ghetto, coded language. Inner city, coded language. Underprivileged. And there are are terms that we adopt, repeat, and recite, which all echo Anglo, patriarchal, where's Cornell? He need to hear that. Bigotry and prejudice. Thank you, Hurston, for that comment. And you're absolutely right. We have to be intentional about checking our own vernacular, our own conversations when we talk about one another. Because if we don't, then like you say, we consistently internalize it and then we perpetuate it against one another as well. And so before you know it, the oppression, we're perpetuating so much, they don't have to do anything.
And, I think an interesting statistic, we're talking about Black on Black crime. Let's talk about white on white crime. 84% of all white crime victims were perpetrated by white people. And so I think it's, again, like, who are we centered in these conversations? What is the standard? What is the norm? And what is othered? Mm-hmm. And so I always think about like how we name whiteness, or how is whiteness the default. And so, again, that is how the system works. We are not, attacking one person in particular. We are attacking a system that has perpetuated itself in order for us to kind of think in these ways and for us to talk about these things and for us to allow for this language to exist and continue. Absolutely.
Kim says, because of what we see, what we are taught, then that's how we end up reacting to folks. And Cornell says we define ourselves by their terminology, which goes directly against what Zora Neale Hurston said. Was Zora Neale Hurston one of them? You have to define yourself for yourself or you'll be couched into others' beliefs of who you are, right? And so you have to think about who is defining you. And the thing is, sadly, we become so married to what we've been given that we often don't have the courage to create for ourselves who and what we are, or to go back to the reservoir that was left for us and then pick those things up and actually say, no, I'm not that. And I refuse to let you call me that or treat me as that and call it out every single time. And I tell you of late, that's what I've been doing. I don't care if it's Black, white, Latinx brothers and sisters, whomever it is. If I'm in a space and I hear something that I know is perpetuating oppression or white supremacist culture, I'm calling it out. And I'm not picking on individuals. What I am doing is saying it's time for us to be intentional and call this, I almost cussed again, stuff out, so that people can start to check themselves and dismantle this stuff that has all of us hung up. Mm-hmm. All of us. Nobody is walking around here without bias. I'm not. You know, and I'm sure that you are. I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time. All of us have areas where we need to further evolve. But if we keep allowing one another to just walk in and practice this same old crap, we don't undo it. So we gotta continue. Hurston, the article headline is wrongfully accused by an algorithm in what may be the first known case of its kind. A faulty facial recognition match led to a Michigan man's arrest for a crime he did not commit. That sounds to me, Hurston, just like eyewitness testimony, some of the most unreliable. So now we know that people can't do it. We're going to put it to machines, and that's going to be even worse. We all going to be jacked up. They going to be coming to get me. You look like, no, I don't. Mm-hmm. You know, I was watching the show. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, you go ahead.
I was just thinking, I was watching the show yesterday, Diggstown, and they were in court, and a guy testified that he saw a woman, and she had on a burgundy hood and all this. And so all of a sudden in the courtroom, all of these people stand up. These women stand up, same clothes, you know, description, all that. He was like, I don't know. And that's what happens to us all the time. We certainly get, you know, we stop them because they fit the profile. No, the profile is just black and male, black and female. It don't matter the age, the height, the weight, none of that. Just black, you know, or Hispanic, or our indigenous brothers and sisters. Like somebody is always looking for a reason, you know, to just jack us up. So I know, Susanna, you were going to go ahead and say something.
Yeah, so there's definitely statistics and research behind how the black on black crime being a myth, because white people who live, white people who live in close quarters with each other are more likely to commit crime against other white people, right? And so I was just looking up over here on the side of when black on black crime became a phrase or a term, and it looks like in the 1970s, writers, journalists started to use the term, and then the politicians caught on to it and were like, oh, you know, so it being used as a ruse for an explanation for why all this crime was happening in black neighborhoods. When, again, Ibram Kendi, I know I keep bringing him up, but I'm learning a lot from him.
No, you should. Go right ahead.
He talks about how really there's the correlation of crime is actually between, and more correlated to income or lack thereof, rather than race. They did a study where they had put a group of Black boys through a summer internship program, a paid summer internship program, and they compared it to another group of Black boys who were unemployed. This is a study that Ibram Kendi talked about. And the boys who had gone to this paid internship were less likely to commit crime than the boys who were unemployed. They did the same with white boys, and the same thing happened. And so the lack of, or really the poverty is really more correlated to crime and the existence of crime than race. So that's something.
And so here's the direct correlation, right? So when you oppress a people, when you steal from them their resources, their land, their culture, everything that could assist them in thriving, and then they become at the bottom of the totem pole, they suffer from a socioeconomic standpoint, then instead of dealing with the root, which is economics, we attach a false narrative on top of that, right? And so then all of a sudden it's, well, the Black people are doing this, or the brown people are doing this, or the indigenous people are doing this. No. What is happening is you have poor people that are attempting to survive that may go steal something to feed their family. Not saying it's right, but you have to then ask, how did they find themselves there? And are they doing it more than anybody else? No, because you can look at rural statistics, crime data. You can look at suburban crime data. They have inside crimes, while Black and brown people and indigenous people often have outside crimes. It's easier to police outside crimes than inside crimes. And that is oftentimes a problem as well. Erica?
Yeah, so, I just wanted to address something that you said, which was this false narrative. And basically, our entire narrative is false. When you look at, and that's just the reality. When you look at it from a historical standpoint all the way up until today, it has simply been a false narrative, and it has been a narrative that was written not by us. And so because of the need to maintain power and position, we have to be portrayed in that negative light, and that narrative has to be maintained in spite of the fact that it's false. And so for us as a people, like you said, we do have to take a good look at that. We have to understand the program. That's why, and I don't know if anybody ever paid attention to the fact that especially when television first became a thing, they would say, well, now bring you back to regular programming.
I love it, Erica.
That is, and that's something that they continue to say. We'll bring you back to regular programming. And so basically, when we sit down and we look at TV, no matter if it's for entertainment or news or whatever the case may be, it's programming. So you have to understand that. And you have to understand how your mind is being programmed by the images and the stories that are being told to you. And then you have to understand what you are internalizing and taking in from that. That's another reason why I'm not really a big TV, but I do enjoy TV, but I watch movies and things like that. But at the end of the day, you really need to understand that one phrase right there that I already told you that you were being programmed. I'm going to bring you back to regular programming.
The Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. And we tune in. But the thing of it is, we tune in. We've always tuned in.
Yeah. That's why marketers and PR people, they're just like media, right? And so you drive down a highway and you see how many signs for McDonald's. Eventually you're going to be like, "Ooh, I'm so hungry. Let me pull into this McDonald's coming up." So you're absolutely right, Erica. I appreciate that analogy because it's so simple, but it's so powerful.
Yes.
And it goes back to what I was just saying also about these photos that we're looking at today, is that we need to question why we believe what we believe about whom it is we believe it. And then, like you said, we are consistently and constantly being programmed. Edgar, I think there's another slide. Is there another slide there? There we go. So this white boy, because he's not a man, raped an unconscious woman in the alley behind a dumpster. And this is the image that they use. I even went and looked up a couple of articles about him and his sentencing. So generally when they start sentencing people, you see pictures of them in the courtroom, right? If they've been incarcerated and not out on bail, then they generally have on, clothing from the jail, all of that. I couldn't find, even when they talked about his sentencing, none of those type of photos. I saw him still being characterized as this star swimmer on the swim team at an Ivy League school, smiling after one of his meets. This woman, however, is a Black woman. She let her child play in the park next to where she worked. They said she neglected him, and this was the image that the media circulated. The child was in the park. She was in the job, right? They were like next door, to each other. They said it was neglect, because the kid was playing in the park alone. She got arrested, and this was the mugshot that they used of her. Straight bull. They were like, straight bull. But this is a rapist. The drug, he even nasty. An unconscious woman in the alley. He's so jacked up. That's just a whole nother ball of wax. Y'all see what I'm saying? but this is the picture. Like he just click. What's his name? And this is the same guy. It as opposed to Trayvon. Trayvon murdered. He a victim. This is a rapist, and this is how we characterize them next to each other. And we have to hold the media to a higher standard, and our own media. Because again, oftentimes what they do is they pick up their news from the Associated Press, and the Associated Press is perpetuating this kind of behavior. And then we'll put out in our own publications the same kind of crap. It's ridiculous. So then when we start talking about our own, that's why we're having this whole heated conversation right now around Black on Black crime, which I love when Nicole tells me that what I heard her say when we were doing Nicole Price, for those of you who don't know who Nicole is, she said that is culturally destructive to talk about Black on Black crime. And I love that term. And so now that's what I'm saying to you. Anybody that brings that up to me, I'm like, it's really unfortunate that you're choosing to be culturally destructive in this time.
Well, but the reality is we don't talk about white on white crime. Like, we don't call that out. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that's not a term.
A thing.
It's not a thing. And it is the thing. But in any case, it's not a thing. And so there again, the way we are portrayed in the media, which is why it's okay for people to, white people to go out and get their guns in their home and aim at peaceful protesters. And it's okay. It's just mildly investigated. But had that been the reverse, and Black people in their homes go and get their guns because they felt threatened by the mob of white people walking through on a peaceful protest, that would be an issue. I mean, right. And so, the way, listen, if you tell the story right, people are subject to believe, what you want them to believe. Mm-hmm. That's what any good journalist does. They always talk about it. And a lot of times, I was in journalism. I did all that. And so they have to produce what's going to sell. They have to produce what people want to hear. But at the end of the day, it's what people are conditioned to hear. So now we have this condition. We've sold this brand. Now we got to continue to do it. And as people of color in this country, Black and brown people, we've never, ever been sold a positive brand. We've never been painted in a positive light. Never. Mm-hmm. And so this is what we are combating. One of the things that we are combating.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of the quote that if you have what was it? Susanna, go ahead and talk while I think about it. I had to think about it because I want to say it right.
It makes me think about how the president talked about Mexican people, and really he was talking about Latinx people, but him putting Mexican people just as the term, as Edgar was saying earlier, and categorized us as murderers and rapists and drug dealers when he was talking about immigration.
Yes.
That all we do is rape and kill and bring drugs. When if you look at, there's so many statistics against that. First of all, DACA, DACA we mentioned earlier in our meeting, to be a DACA recipient, you cannot have a criminal record. And so those are kiddos who were brought to America by their parents. They are not allowed to, they are under very strict stipulations. One of them being graduating from high school and then not having a criminal record. So first of all, that's false. And then there are statistics around the fact that immigrants of all places are actually less likely to commit a crime than U.S. citizens, U.S.-born citizens. So those narratives, and then that we pick up and we adopt as people of color. I've heard Latinos say, immigrants are making it worse for us, right? And that's a narrative that some of us have adopted. And so how do we also perpetuate that? It's sad.
It is sad. And they bank on us can you guys still hear me? Okay, good. They bank on us not reading. not investigating, not digging deep. You know, the old adage was, you know, you put something, you want to hide something from somebody, a Black person, you put it in a book. But the quote that I was gonna leave you out with is actually an African Nigerian proverb, that until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So who's in control of the narrative? And so when we ask that question, we ask it in terms of the media. Who's in control of the media and the way in which they then display us, and how do we hold them accountable? So here's another photo. So you see the Black people just marching, hands up, fist in the air. You know, we know what that means. That definitely means if you see anything like that, you know somebody's arguing for justice, but they're being called thugs. But in the opposite picture, you just have some white folks, they tearing up the town, but oh, they're just some rowdy old boys out there having a good old time. You know, that type of thing. You see in the other picture where Black folks, brown folks are being called animals. Then you have the opposite picture where you have your white counterparts flipping over vehicles, standing on them, you know, all this kind of stuff. Oh, they're just they're just a little mischievous. That's okay. And of course, then, you know, they're destroying their own communities. And of course, that last one, they're just you know, they're I can't see the little term over there, but
Booze.
Boothfield.
Yeah.
Boothfield
revelers. They're just a little tipsy there. A little tipsy. You know, it's just a bunch of bull crap, and we have to stop buying into it. And you're right, Erica, the fact that you don't watch a lot of TV, you know, you don't always see kind of the narrative, so you're not feeding your spirit, your soul with these things. But we have to be careful what we take in, because that's of course what comes out. Cornell says the dehumanization of Black people goes back to the justification of our enslavement, and before that.
Yeah.
Even before that, because prior to our enslavement, we had to be seen as less than in order to even be enslaved in and of itself. You had to be
Absolutely.
Savages, which, you know, that was a term that was placed upon all indigenous people in their own lands. Mm-hmm. You know, the Aborigines were called savages. Africans were called anything that was not European, which is really interesting when you look at the history of Europeans. And just saying, those were the real savages.
Yeah, looking at some of that history, unfortunately, white Europeans, this again, Ibram Kendi, Tommy, white Europeans had got some people from Africa, some people from African countries kind of on their side, and told them that the people from other African countries were the savages. And so Africans amongst themselves had unfortunately kind of turned against each other, and that justified them assisting white Europeans in kidnapping and enslaving other African people. So if you look at the relationships between some African countries, some of that hostility is still there, of some African countries being better than others, or being considered more higher class. And that goes back to white Europeans kind of getting people on their end, so that it would make them easier to enslave.
Absolutely. It's always been a mechanism to turn people of color against one another in order to maintain control. And sadly, we weren't able to see beyond that, or to see through that. And so your enemy then, of course, you know, divide and conquer. I mean, it's the rule of war. You know, I think about that in terms of the United States. Somebody pointed out, must have been a video or something, and they were saying how, you know, white people always say, well, go back to Africa, go back to Africa. And someone posed the question, well, what if I told you to go back to where you from? Where you going? And I was like, nowhere, because nobody would have them. Because if you remember who founded this country, they were the deplorable, the least of. Criminals. Well, go ahead.
Well, so I've had several conversations where we talk about that very thing. The Europeans that came over here, it wasn't the cream of the crop or the best of the best. It was the worst of the worst, the least of the least when they got over here. And they didn't come over here with all these great moral ideas. They came over here with something different, and so, I think we need to take a look at that. We need to see the whole, and anymore when I talk about history, because whenever I think about that word, I think about his story. Mm-hmm. And so, I think about, so I really try to use, knowing the whole story. You have to know the whole story. You have to know every angle, the full picture. You have to, in order to really understand why we are where we are today. It is critical that we do that, because, this conversation isn't a new conversation. This conversation happened 60 years ago. This very conversation was happening 60 years ago, maybe not on live stream, but it was happening, 60 years ago. No, really. And, whether they was talking about what happened, what precipitated this, or, whatever the case may be, I don't know. But what I do know is that we really need to see the whole story. We need to understand the whole story. We need to understand the mindset of everyone, all of us. We need to understand what the program is, what the intention behind it is, why we still exist in this space. We need to answer those questions. We need to come to those understandings, and then we can, enact real change.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's a lot of people that just aren't ready for that. Like you said, The Matrix. And they say in that movie was phenomenal. There's so much in it. It's just rich with so much. And it is. But one of the things that I think it was Morpheus says, that everybody's mind is not ready.
That's right.
To be free. Everybody's mind is not ready to be free. So it's critical that we free as many as we can.
Ooh, everybody's mind. I mean, think about that. Just take a second. Everybody's mind is not ready to be free.
You think about that. I'm going to go there from a religious aspect. No matter what religion you choose to look to, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, it don't matter. Judaism. If you try to tell one that the other is wrong and the other is right, or whatever, death is going to ensue. They are going to be ready to kill, die. I mean, really, because your mind, but yet, and still, the fruits of the spirit talks about tolerance and temperance. Tolerance and temperance. So that means that we should have a healthy regard and respect for other people's faith and belief, but we don't.
Mm-hmm.
That applies to every other system, because guess what? Religious systems are all political systems.
That's all they are.
That's all they are. That's all they've ever been.
Meant to control.
Meant to control. So name me a system that we exist in this space and time. Name a system that is not meant to control. I can't think of one right off the top of my head. I don't know why. But in any case, I can't think of one right off the top of my head. But because our minds, we don't have physical chains. They don't need them. Because we've been tuning in to regular programming for years now. And before we had TV, we had the newspaper. The newspaper put out images.
Radio.
Those were the images that radio told you stories. Mm-hmm. And of course, they couldn't be lying to us. I mean, why would they lie to us?
Because the internet told me.
So I'm just saying. So when it comes to this concept and this idea, it really is a deprogramming. You have to change. You got to totally think differently. Again, it goes back to my great old Montessori quote: "Never teach a child something they have to unlearn and then relearn later." It's not the relearning; it's the unlearning that's the process, and it may or may not happen. Not everybody's able.
The unlearning takes a lifetime, and I think that the learning takes maybe a year, if not, or whatever. But the unlearning takes a lifetime, and it's something that you never get out of your brain. To a certain extent, that you're doing it wrong, or that you have the wrong information, but it will always live in there to a certain extent. I also think about how many of our educators have bought into these narratives, and how I think a lot also about discernment and using your what do you call that? I just lost the word, but it's the ability to make a decision or not to make a decision, having the choice to, not suspend somebody or not to write somebody up. But
your discretion.
Discretion, there it is. Thank you for that. And I wonder how these narratives are so ingrained into how we use discretion, and how we utilize them, either use that discretion to confirm our biases or to deny them. And so, because we all swim in it. You all mentioned this. We've been watching the same programming for since the beginning of our lives. And so, how does this play out in classrooms every day? How does it play out in buildings every day? How does this play out in relationship building with our parents? What does that look like with our administrators? How does this influence all those relationships that ultimately should be there in support of the children that we're trying to serve?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's very clear. Hurston spoke earlier, and I would love to pull his comment up. He says, as a society, we are conditioned to accept indoctrination over context. Also, some things people don't want brown folk to know, and those therefore intentionally left out of books or delivered in a singular sentence with a distorted reality and altered context. And I love that, because that's exactly then how people show up, right? So they leave it so we don't know it, but at the same time, they're feeding something into other people that are looking for something to dig their heels into and justify the opinions, thoughts, and beliefs that they already have about us, right? So while they're deconstructing us, they're building up reconstruction. Remember, we talked about that before. This whole system that becomes self-perpetuating. And so that's how the educators show up. That's how the administrators show up. So that bias is there because they were looking for something to justify the belief that they had about us anyway.
Well, that's why.
So it's easier. It's easier for them to suspend that boy, that girl that is black or brown versus someone that looks like them because, oh, Johnny is just mischievous. But Desmond over here, or Shaquila, or whoever, that is a difference. Those people apparently meant to do harm, and therefore they need to be punished.
That's why revisionist history or revisionist narratives is a thing in education. So you have people who will just pull out the things that they deem are important enough. First of all, a lot of times in defense of educators is what's put in front of us, right? Either part of our curriculum or Edgar, can we take the comment off the screen?
No, take that one down. We're gonna come back to that one though, because that's a good one.
Wait a second. Did that get bigger when I put? No, it didn't. Right.
No, that's a different one. You got hers to be giving us a lot of stuff, boy.
He be teaching us. I like it. But revisionist history, right? Which is, I'm gonna just pick and choose what sounds right. In defense of educators, like I said, we teach what gets put in front of us, right? But here's my my challenge for educators who are on this path to being anti-racist. First of all, know that it's a journey, okay? Second of all, it's one thing spending this summer reading all these articles and reading all these books and learning. That's one thing, and that's great. But that's a step one of step 55 in being an anti-racist educator, right? So I commend everyone who I am seeing. I'm seeing a lot of educators. I see a lot of my white educators reading White Fragility this summer. That's awesome. That's great. However, when you walk into that classroom or into that online classroom in August, being anti-racist is what we're talking about. Making sure that you're not putting articles in front of kids that are damaging to their self-esteems and to their narratives of their own people. See how it's like something so specific. I can be anti-racist by ensuring that this article that I'm going to have my classroom read does not perpetuate false narratives or negative narratives about the Black community. That is an example, right? It's not, it doesn't have to be I'm going to argue with a white person in the store when they say all lives matter, right? I mean, that's another example. But when we're talking about being anti-racist educators, it's about making conscious decisions every day to not be a part of that revisionist history, to not just pick and choose, okay, well, the Columbus history is important because that's what we learned, right? And the, I don't know, the Mexican-American War is important because that's what we learned, right?
Dr. Seuss Week.
Dr. Seuss Week, right? Black History Month being only in February. Hispanic Heritage Month being pretty much non-existent in schools, but only being from September to October 15th. All of those little ways, I commend everyone for doing this white fragility, and I've seen people reading how to be anti-racist, including me. But reading and learning is just, it's almost just you catching up to the experiences of Black people. Like,
and the sad part is though that it took us to be in this place in this time for us to do that work. Yeah. And so I know you're nice, I'm not. And you said in defense of educators, and I'm like, the hell with that. I'm not defending you as an educator if you have chosen to take a cookie cutter curriculum and not dig deep. Educators should be forever learning. Period. I'm not in the classroom anymore, but guess what? I'm always learning. I'm always reading with an open mind that perhaps some opinion or thought that I have can be magnified, amplified, changed around, switched around because I'm getting more knowledge. If you are not that type of educator, you don't need to be in the classroom, period.
Absolutely.
Because we are not making widgets. I'm not making a pen. I am assisting in shaping the lives and the trajectory of children, and Black and brown children and Black and brown people. Poor people have been done wrong long enough.
Yeah.
So I ain't with that. You nicer than me, Susanna. I ain't with that.
I will also state that, and I was reading an article earlier today about, you're right. I commend folks who are doing the work and are looking at Dr. Robin DiAngelo and seeing all that stuff. And also, I will say that there's plenty of writings out there that existed prior to Dr. DiAngelo around whiteness. And so we also don't utilize those resources to continue to erase Black and brown scholarship on these conversations. And so I hope that if a book like White Fragility is your entry point into the space, I also hope that you continue to look at other perspectives because it existed prior to.
Yeah. Hurston did put something else. He said false narratives. Yes, that was a big one. False narratives penetrate all facets of the brown experience in this country. Even religion is not exempt. Yes, in fact, it has been one of the most powerful tools of control. Yes. American Christianity is based on the reimagined perspective of an Anglo King James. Yes. That Bible y'all love. Yes. through canonization, remove books and passages that would empower women, yes, especially women, and the marginalized. He baked in a heavy amount of approved submission and subjugation to control the masses while giving the illusion of free will. That's it. We might just wrap it up and go off the air right now.
That is just amazing. I love it. The illusion. That illusion. That's it right there. That's it. That's wow.
And let's see. Kim said something as well. I think she was talking about unlearning. Then she talked also about people not wanting to be uncomfortable. And that goes directly to what Erica was saying earlier, is that Erica, people you said they have to have a mind to be free.
Yes.
But that also requires deconstructing the foundational belief system that you have built up. Yeah, and that is scary and it is messy.
It is. It is extremely scary and it is extremely messy, because what you have to do then is acknowledge that the people who were teaching you these things, which was often our family, our mothers, our grandmothers, our fathers and our grandfathers and so forth, were wrong. Mm-hmm. But if they receive, you do. And as wise and as wonderful and as magnificent as they were, if they received the wrong information, they only going to pass down the wrong information. If they received the wrong programming, they only going to pass down the wrong. Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better.
Come on, somebody.
So if you didn't know better, you can only do what you know. you know,
That's
and
it.
that's it. But we have to be really willing to look in the mirror, take a hard look at our reality. And as brilliant and wonderful as our people were, you know, it was some major things, some mistakes made. They learned the wrong stuff.
Well,
you know,
that word that Hurston used earlier, context.
Exactly. Yes.
What time were they living in? How was their thoughts and all of those types of things shaped? And it was about the context, the space in which they were living in then. We had another comment. Some people choose to stay in bondage and their thoughts on others because this is where they are comfortable. So no matter who is being persecuted and would be set free on the other end. Absolutely. People choose to say, you choose to stay ignorant. And I think that's why I have less, Lord. Less I have a lower tolerance because I feel like when people say I didn't know, and I'm like, well, where you been living, boo? Under a rock? No, you chose not to know. You chose not to see. You chose to remain ignorant.
You know what? My coach and I were talking. Y'all was talking about being like, it's the trend right now to be woke, right? And y'all were talking about how everyone wants to know everything. It's not easy being woke, especially being in a school system. If you serve in a school system and you are woke, be ready for the stress, baby, because every single second of that institution and that system goes against what being woke. And being woke, you know, has turned into this whole trend and all of that. I'm talking about people who have learned anti-racism or who think, right? We keep talking about the white woman who thinks she has learned enough and so now is ready to go save the world and save these black and brown babies, right? But I'm talking about you see the microaggressions, which Ibram Kendi doesn't even call it microaggressions. He just calls it racist abuse, right? Racist abuse happen every second of the day, either to you as a person of color, either to our students who are people of color, either to our parents, to our paraprofessionals. We have a lot of paraprofessionals who are people of color, who are not native English speakers. They get a lot of that racist abuse. And so if you are going to go into the classroom this August and you're committing yourself to being woke or anti-racist, then you need to be ready. Because either you're going to, well, you know what? Being anti-racist means that you're going to defend against that system, right? Like, it's not like, I know this, so now I'm going to be better. No, that means that when you see it, you call it out. That means that you yourself review your curriculum and make sure you're not perpetuating it. That means that when a parent is being abused by the administration in the office, you stop and you say something. And so being anti-racist is a challenge for a lot of people, especially who have been in the school system for so long, that you kind of start to either burn out or really start to perpetuate the system. The system wasn't built for brown and black people. Remember,
or you get to a point where you want to kill people and you know it's time to go. Erica, tell me about it. Erica tell you I had to go because I was gonna kill somebody, and y'all didn't have enough bail money to get me out. But Monica says this. She says, my motto for 2020 is that your comfort is not my responsibility. And frankly, if you feel comfortable, you are doing this wrong. You, girl,
say that.
Gonna make me shout up in here.
Say that.
Yes.
I'm gonna raise my hand here because I think I'm not gonna call out the fact that we're over time. That would be irresponsible. But I would also say that, you know, something that I struggle with. One is, you know, I always, just like Susanna talks about Ibram, I always talk about Temel Kun and, you know, white dominant culture, white culture, and like how it shows up in systems. And right to comfort is definitely one of those that are listed as that. I think something that I struggle with is that there are a lot of people, black and brown folks included, who have never studied, who have never read any works on racism or diversity and inclusion, or whatever the related topic might be. And so sometimes it is irresponsible for us to engage in these conversations when we don't have a sense of work or the work that has been done in the past to get us to these points. And so something I struggle with is like the need to educate folks and to share the resources and to do that work, because some people are legitimately looking for these resources and they just don't know where to start, even though, you know, it's out there. But also I see that a lot of in our communities. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most is like we sometimes also position ourselves as experts in these conversations. Like we know the history and like we know, you know, how we know how it all perpetuates systems, and like we're still doing the work. Yes. And so, you know, I don't know what that balance is like, but I also think about it from the perspective of like, just because I'm Latino doesn't mean that I fully understand the Latino experience. I can speak on behalf of the Latino experience, that I'm proximate to some of the issues that we were talking about, right? And so I think about from that perspective as well. I hope that the community sees us as a resource for us to continue to engage these conversations, but also know that we're each, and I have seen all of us grow. I've had the pleasure of seeing all of us grow. And I get reminded of this all the time. The Edgar who's talking to you today isn't the Edgar who you would have spoken to 3 years ago. Very different
last
person.
year for me, yesterday.
Hello.
You know, I share that.
I think about it, Edgar. I remember we were in a focus group together, and in that moment, and Lotto was with you at the time, and I talked about in that group, and I think that's where Laura and I really were able to kind of bond from a distance. Even is I was like, I had struggled for so long with making the Latinx community issues my issues, or seeing where they were parallel or similar. And I was just like, I ain't having it. I was like, I'm not, if it ain't Black, I ain't dealing with it. And for whatever the reason, I had either been reading or being exposed to something different or thinking about it in a different way. And in that moment, I realized that the fact that we had been pitted against each other for so long and unable to see our similarities is what kept the power structure in place. And when I spoke to that thing and said, we got to do it differently, is the moment when I knew that was a moment of growth. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. We consistently are growing and changing and evolving, and that's the way it should be. And it's exciting and it is freeing. As Erica talked about earlier, we are in a place where we want to be free, and we're doing that fearlessly. We understand that there's going to be times when we call those that taught us wrong in a not a disrespectful way. It just was wrong. And it's okay to say that. And then we have to own our own stuff. As Ayala tells me, I'll own your own stuff. And we got to, man, I jacked that up. So let me fix it now. And let me speak to when I've been destructive, as Nicole would tell us, culturally destructive. We are over time. I want to run through some more of these comments. So George is on. Hey, George. Visionary in the house. He says, every mess is scary to clean. Yes, your elders taught a lesson with misinformation, but the access we have now no longer allows us to remain ignorant. That's absolutely right. Kim's like, yeah. I mean, Monica like, right. Ronaldo says, hey, Ronaldo, you have to be willing to have a target on your back. How do I know that one also well? You do. And different people will choose that path or not, depending on where they are, what their needs are, and all of that. So I still constantly tell myself, like, everybody's not going to be Katina. They're not going to choose to do it the way Katina does. And so I have to have some empathy, sympathy, and compassion for the people that choose to do it differently, because we all have value in the war. Let's see. Edgar, they said overtime, we don't care. That's good stuff. And that we are serving as a resource. Thank you all so much for seeing us as a resource. Hurston, always good to engage with you, of course. Monica says, that is one of the issues I have with this cancel culture. It does not leave any room for growth. I probably said all sorts of crazy stuff 10 years ago. Absolutely. Like me too. But I have had the opportunity to learn and rethink my positions. If people are sincere with their change, we need to give them grace. And I have to remind myself that all the time.
That's now, comment on that real quick. I think cancel culture is something that I struggle with because, one, I think it feels like it's a generational thing, but the reality is like some of us are just raggedy sometimes, and we out here saying crazy things. And like if you're caught up, I'm like, listen, if I go through my Twitter feed or if I go through my Facebook feed, I am sure, and somebody will at some point, and like I am prepared for that moment, because I think it's in that moment that true leadership and your true growth should emerge, versus like, it's not an apology. Like you have to really be honest with like, yeah, okay, I said that, I don't know, 5 years ago. Here's how my position has changed, and here's why my position has changed, and here's what I learned. And then you still have to face, ultimately you still have to face the consequences of your actions, whether you had the information or not. And, I think ultimately this is a long-term game. This is not a short-term thing. And so your actions always will speak out on your behalf over time. And I think that's been my struggle, because there are plenty of people out here. Also, like I've been thinking a lot about diplomacy and what diplomacy looks like, and if diplomacy is actually helpful or not. I know Kina is looking at me like, no, and I think I'm starting to not believe in diplomacy. But I think about like how people do business in this world, and what does that mean? And so like, what's my role in that? What's my role in creating these spaces? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just really like, what I think Serge actually asked us this question, like, what are you willing to give up?
That's it right there.
What are you willing to give up in order to propel this work forward? And, I remember when I was first asked that question, I did not have a good answer. I just didn't. I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And now, probably 2-3 years in, I'm like, listen, I got nothing to lose on this. Like, what do I have to lose? I think about like limited time that I have left on Earth, whatever that is, whether it be another day or another 30 years, like, did I dedicate the time that I was awake to making this work? And can I hold to that? So I went off on a tangent here. Cancel culture is really like, I've thought a lot about it, and I've thought a lot about like both the good and the bad of it. How we still need to be held accountable for our actions. And like,
yeah, I love that. Edgar, I love that you brought that up, talking about taking responsibility for something you may have said 5 or 10 years ago. We see politicians have to deal with that all the time. And they'll say, I'm a changed person. And I don't have a problem with that. I am a firm believer that we do not hold people hostage to their past. However, there has to be evidence. There has to be evidence that you've changed.
Yes.
Where is your action? Because an apology doesn't mean anything if it's
I'm
not
sorry, it's
coupled with
empty.
Action.
Absolutely. And
That's
I'm
it
sorry,
right there, Erica.
it's empty. It's just, I'm sorry. And okay.
And I'll say, I know you're sorry. Now tell me something I didn't know.
Yeah, without the action. I think, because of the makeup of the system, the majority of us are product of some real bad choices, decisions, and actions, and things like that. When you look at particularly this system of racism that exists in our country, you think when you go back over the years, and we have current politicians who made racist statements back when in the 80s or whatever case may be, I'm always, I do try to give grace, because the reality is, in that time, it was socially acceptable to outwardly, you know what I mean? During these times, it was socially acceptable. Everybody's mindset was here. Everybody's mindset was there. But when hopefully people will evolve and get to a space where they're saying, I'm not that person anymore, and whatever, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. But like Katina said, there has to be action. There has to be works that support your evolution and your change. There has to be works that says, I'm no longer this person. I no longer think and feel this way. There has to be works that says, this is how I function now, as opposed to how I function then. Because the reality is, we have to look at, I'm all into generationalism and all that, because I think it's important, and understanding the times, those times and the things that you go through during those times. It gives you perspective. It gives you the perspective on people's mindsets. Like right now, like 20, 30 years from now, people will be thinking about our kids and what the mindset was during COVID and, all of that. So it's important and it's relevant. It is relevant. And so we do have to look at that and give grace. However, you can't just come to me and say, I'm sorry, that I was calling people niggers and things like that. But, niggas got to stay in their place. Okay, you ain't sorry because you just said the same thing you were saying back then, so that don't work. Or, so I think.
And you can't do it when it's convenient.
You cannot.
So, I'm thinking about Joe Biden right now. We have an election coming up, and I remember vividly how Anita Hill was treated, and he controlled those hearings during that time, and how detrimental and destructive he was to women, in particular that Black woman. And so here you come now, you're running for office when you've had all of these years to say something to her and to rectify that, and all of the other women that suffered as a result of your negligence, and you didn't do it. So now, because you want something from us, you want to apologize. I have a problem with that. You just had a sudden revelation? Or is it because we brought it up to your remembrance?
I think the revelation
told you, the
revelation was like, I need to get votes, and so obviously I need to apologize.
I was just about to say that. Or is it because we want our votes?
Like, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
I'm, on the other side of that, I will say, something that I've learned to do, and this is because of growth. When I hurt somebody's feelings, or I do something that unintentional or intentional, regardless, if I hurt somebody's feelings and they call it to question, or they call me into question, or let me know of that, my initial reaction is to apologize, right? And then I have learned I have learned not to apologize during that moment. I've learned to just acknowledge the fact that I've made a mistake. And then I also sit in my discomfort, because the reality is a lot of us apologize to get back to feeling comfortable. And so a lot of us don't take the time necessary to really understand and process how we've hurt someone. A lot of us don't want to experience that, or want to go through that process. And so, I find even in my relationship with Laura, whenever I go crazy or I do something that, hurts feelings or otherwise, I think about I listen, I receive it, and I say, I'm going to need you to give me some time to think about it and truly process it. And I will come back to you when I fully process it on my end. That way, my apology is legit. And that way, that I've also have created the time to say, here's my action plan, or my correction course, or the plan for my reconciliation to this. I just think about that a lot too, because a lot of people are quick to say, hey, I'm sorry, didn't mean to offend. And the reality is well, you offended, so.
Your intent, to hell with your good intentions.
Right.
That's the actual article. I ain't just saying that. That's if you guys want to look it up, it's an article called "To Hell with Good Intentions," and it is great, and I rest upon it because it means a lot.
Intent versus impact.
Well, exactly. Intent versus impact. Your intent don't matter if that's the way I experienced you when I was hurt.
Right.
You just have to accept the fact that I was hurt. Don't justify it. Don't explain it away. Damn, I messed up. So I think we
gotta make dinner.
Yes, well, I was going to say we got to wrap up. So these lovely wives and girlfriends and people can take care of their households. If anybody wants to send me food or take care of me and my household, I will full well receive it.
Put that cash up out there, Katina. Put that cash up out there.
But I want to thank you guys. This was a much needed conversation. Again, we always try to link things back that we discussed to the classroom. So understand and know that there is a profound impact to the way in which Black and brown people, children, teenagers, adults are represented in the media, be that print media, be that television, radio, whatever. And it shapes the way in which we then walk into a classroom or a virtual classroom space and interact and engage with them. Those narratives are in the back of our mind, and they're either going to be liberating to the people we interact and engage with, or they're going to catapult them backward and further keep them in oppression and bondage. And so our goal as a coalition is to always make sure we are working toward freedom, working toward liberation and independence and all of that good stuff. So we encourage you to really sit with yourself, be intentional about your actions, and think through why you believe what you believe. Who has been feeding your soul? So that being said, Edgar, Erica, Susanna, are there any closing thoughts or words that you'd like to share? Nope. All right. Remember to keep this family in Kansas City in prayer, you guys. A 4-year-old was taken from us this morning. I know, words cannot express. No mother should have to bear what this young lady is bearing in her larger extended family. He had his first open heart surgery at 4 months old, and he had beat that. So to have a coward or a group of cowards in our community that is committing this type of mayhem is unacceptable. And just as we call out everyone else as it relates to the treatment of us, we have to call each other out as well. So with that, I love you guys. We will see you next Monday. Remember to use us as a resource. Thank you guys for allowing me to be with you. And we will see you all soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.